All right, so I'm going to hand over to Sue to kick us off. So where she's got her slides up here with the title of Starting Gendered Legal Careers Early, Gendered Patterns in Undergraduate Law Students Module Option Allocations. So over to you, Sue. Thank you very much.
Right. So, I've got a mic as well. So you can have a foghorn voice and a mic, which means you may have to put your fingers in your ears at some point. Thomas and I have just done a quick bit of maths. We're going to take 20 minutes each. So I'm going to speak for 15 minutes and then leave 5 minutes for Q&A, if there are any questions. Am I using my laptop as a control? Right, okay, that's good. Okay. So I'm Sue Westwood. I work at the law school. I'm going to be talking about an accidental piece of research that I conducted. And that's often the best kind of research, I think. Not that my research is necessarily very good, but I landed on a very interesting topic completely by accident. So I'm going to talk about that topic today. So I'm going to talk primarily about 5 things. We're going to canter through these things. I'm just going to give you a brief one-slide overview about gender inequalities in HE. That'll be that sorted. And then gender inequalities in legal careers. And then I'm going to talk to you about this recent project I did. I'm only going to very skim over the findings. There's lots of data, and I don't want to kind of drown you in statistics, particularly before lunch. And then I'm going to talk about the pedagogical implications of some of the findings. Now, this is also a paper that's about to be published, and I had some very helpful feedback from the peer reviewers, which made me rethink some of my assumptions. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that as well, and it's a kind of work in progress, really. And I'm going to mention future research because I'm hoping this will lead on to future research projects. So first of all, gender inequalities in higher education. Well, as we know, there are quite a few. It plays a key role in choice of subject in undergraduates, both internationally and in the UK. There is, as we know, an underrepresentation of women in STEM subjects. And women tend to do degrees or majors in the US in the humanities, education, and social sciences, particularly, for example, psychology. Men, by contrast, tend to choose subject areas which focus on business and or STEM subjects. And women are also, in terms of careers, predominating those careers involving emotional labour in the often undervalued and underpaid caring professions. So there's a pattern. There are references at the bottom. I haven't stuck them in each example just to save space on the slides, and there's a list of references at the end. Anybody who wants to see my slides, just email me. So, what are the gender inequalities in legal careers? This is quite interesting. 61% of solicitors are women. So women predominate in the legal profession, or this part of the legal profession, but only 35% are partners in law firms, and even fewer are partners at senior partner level. But that women are also much more represented in other staff. Other fee-earning roles, legal execs, for example, roles directly supporting the fee earners, managerial roles, IT, HR, and other service roles. No great surprise there, really. Women in senior roles, in particular, experience both a gender pay gap and a gender pension gap. And notably, women are underrepresented in criminal law and in corporate law. So we've got some interesting patterns going on in legal careers, and I could tell you some stories about patterns in legal academia as well. I won't bore you with that too much, other than to say women tend to predominate again in non-corporate legal specialisms, in a nutshell. Women from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds are multiply disadvantaged. They fare less well than both white women and black men in the legal profession. In terms of LGBTQ legal careers, heterosexual men earn on average more than gay men, while both heterosexual and gay men earn more than lesbians and heterosexual women. So you can see an intersectionality there with gender, but also with sexual orientation. There's a need for more research about trans and gender non-binary lawyers and lawyers with disabilities and other intersectional diversities. Now, why do women succeed less well in legal careers? Well, it's not associated with ability, because many women law graduates outperform their male peers. But, and so you can imagine there's been a lot of theorising about this, which you're very happy to hear. I'm not going to haul you through at the moment. But to summarise it up, 3 lines summing up all this theorising is pretty good crack, actually. So people have talked about cultural capital, gender stereotyping, masculinized social networking, long working hours, and limited or no opportunities for flexible working. And in fact, research suggests that when women are looking prospectively, women law students looking prospectively at future careers, thinking about having a family and needing to have a career that they will be able to fit alongside parenting is key in their thinking, less so for men. There's a new Women in Law pledge, the Law Society of England and Wales and other parties have got involved with, committed to promoting gender equality in the profession and various strategies to improve women's career progression into senior roles via the inevitable action plans, objectives and targets. Okay, so that's the context. That's a general kind of gendered context. And both in terms of HE in general, legal careers more specifically. And so now I'm going to talk to you about the project. Now, I just have to put us in our work in context for the moment. So York Law School is different from almost all other law schools, and it has a very different pedagogical approach. So the emphasis is on self-directed learning via PBL, problem-based learning. So students in years 1 and 2 go into law firms. They are a firm and they work together for a year. And much of their learning is facilitated by extremely skilled tutors, also called associate lecturers, and there's kind of different titles for different things, who guide them through the process. And I did it in my first year here, and I was rubbish at it because I can't shut up. And the skill for tutors is that they sit on it, right? And they let the students work it out for themselves. And only if the students are really going down the wrong path do they kind of nudge them, into the right direction. So it's incredibly skilled work to know when to hold back and when to not hold back. And it works extremely well. Our students graduate, and this isn't just us patting ourselves on the back with, our students are very good at independent research. So we had a second-year student who went and shadowed a barrister for a day, and she said to him halfway through, can I help out in some way? I don't just want to watch. And he said, well, I've got this little bit of research I need doing for this afternoon. And she said, oh, leave it to me. And he looked like, yeah, right, okay. She gave it back to him within an hour, and he said, this is fantastic. This is better than I could have expected from one of my researchers. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to inculcate in our students, that kind of independent research skills, that ability, that can-do approach, and of course, teamworking. We don't only teach through PBR, there's also a programme of other subjects, core modules, which we teach through plenaries and other processes. Plus, crucially, in years 2 and 3, there are module options. So students in year 1 choose from a menu of options for year 2 to add into the whole programme, and in year 2, they choose from a menu of options for year 3. And it's those module options that I've been looking into. So we've had 66 modules over the past 7 years, some running every year, others only running some years. Modules tend to be delivered by people, by our own particular subject area interest. So for example, I do law, gender and sexuality, grown, and I do law and emotion, woohoo. First time last year we had 8 students, now we've got 19, I think 17, 19, so it's going up. But if we're on research leave, or if we're unavailable for other reasons, then generally speaking, the modules don't run. As I say, it's a range of subjects based on academics' areas of interest. And the first and second year undergraduates rank preferences from a menu of options for the following year. And then we don't work out which modules they end up on. The Garobi optimizer does instead. And its goal is to satisfy the most students. So it wants to make the most students happy. That does mean that sometimes it makes some students very unhappy. And if students are extremely unhappy, we will move them into other modules. But it's rare, it's pretty rare. But generally speaking, the and we haven't looked into this, and I'm hoping that we will, the sense is that most students get at least one of their top preferences, and sometimes they get both, or a top and a second. Right, so this is where this all started from. In fact, the lead admin person, who has now departed, but I will still thank her very much forever in talks like this, said to me in passing, well, you know the boys and girls like different modules, don't you? And of course I, meerkat-like, said, really? And I thought I'd better look into this. And she was absolutely right, actually. So I did a trawl of 7 years worth of data, Year 2 and Year 3 module option allocation. 2014 to 15, 2016 to 2022, you'll notice there's a year missing. The data wasn't there for some reason. So it was collated by student number, and then the admin team allocated gender. I'll talk more about ethnicity towards the end. I then analysed it manually by gender composition, and then I was given some funding to have a research assistant help me too, which was a great help, and compared the female to male ratios across the 7 years. So, what did I find? There were marked gender differences in over half of the modules in terms of those 2 years. So in terms of half of the modules, there was parity, really. There was a same proportion of female to male students as on the whole course. But in the other half, women were underrepresented in modules relating to commercial, corporate and financial law, and they were, surprise, surprise, overrepresented on modules relating to family, health, social welfare, gender and sexuality. And the most marked differences were where women were overrepresented. What do I mean by that? There were some modules that were almost 100% female students, whereas when there were more male students than female students, the gap was not as wide. So this is the proportion of women and men undergraduates at YLS over the 7 years. 42% men, 58% women. So when I was analysing the statistics, the data, I was looking for variations on that proportion, on that ratio. Now, as I say, there's lots of data here, and I'm not going to drag you all through all of these, but this is where women students are underrepresented. Company law, criminal justice, financial crime, history of law, trusts, corporate and commercial, international foundations, dispute resolution, competition law, foundational issues, and principles of financial regulation. And you may notice a certain echoing here of what I was talking about earlier on in terms of gender and higher education, and gender and the legal profession. And as you can see, I'm not going to drag you through it, but let's look at the top ones, which is that kind of marked difference. In company law, 40% were women students, compared with 58% of women students comprising the whole student population. Now, you're welcome to ask me about these statistics. You can go back to them later if you really want to, even over lunch if you fancy. These are the modules where women students are overrepresented. Prisons and penal policy, law, gender, sexuality, and you'll notice, in terms of what I was talking about the gap, law, gender and sexuality, I'm looking if I get 2 males on each course. So 85% of the students are women. Prisons and penal policy, 86%. I should also say that what I did with these data is there were some other modules where there were also similarly high disproportionate ratios, but they had very small student numbers, so I excluded those. So these are the ones with comparatively larger student numbers. Housing, welfare and immigration, family law and practice, we're all healthcare law, we're all in the 80s, near 80s, medical law, mental health, mental capacity, criminal law, criminal process, art law, family law, law in the welfare state. And you don't need me to spell out for you that there's a certain theme or set of themes emerging in these data. Now, this is where the editors helped me, because I just went straight into, well, it's gender inequality, isn't it? Let's get our feminism out. And I still think it is, I still think I can make an argument for that, but the editors pointed out to me that I might need to think about some other factors as well. Good point. So this is what they prompted me to think about. The module leader's gender, the module leader's pedagogic style, the class size or anticipated class size, class gender composition, module format, times, number of assessments. We know our students really choose their modules based on how arduous and time-consuming the assessments look like. Scheduling, do people have family or work commitments, and sometimes the schedules just won't work for them. Whether we're an old or new university, and of course the fact that we teach PBL style, does that make us different from, say, another law school that doesn't? And of course, women students may be concerned about the challenges. It may not be that they're not interested in the subject, it may be that they are interested, but they're not convinced that it's going to be particularly easy for them to make their way in a corporate and commercial career pathway, and so they're hesitant for those reasons. If you think I'm going to, you feel free to shout at me if there's an issue around time. But as you can see where I'm taking you, right? But I think there are really some significant gender issues here. So, connecting with the literature. So the findings resonate with the literature on gendered trends in degree subject choice and gendered patterns in legal careers. So women are overrepresented in this study in legal topics relating to care, support, families, relationality, health, welfare, and gender sexuality. And they're underrepresented in modules relating to corporate, commercial, and financial law. And this echoes a similar underrepresentation of women in other related legal roles. And it also echoes the kind of underrepresentation of women in STEM subjects and the overrepresentation of women in the humanities. Other connections. Well, why, for example, do I only get at best 2 male students on the law, gender and sexuality module? Well, standpoint theory, I'm not going to drag you through my interpretation of standpoint theory, but basically we all see things from where we're standing, and where we're standing is informed by a wide variety of norms and values, including gendered norms and values. And there's an argument that those at the bottom see the workings of privilege and powerful systems better than those at the top do looking down. So women students are more likely, this is my argument, to be sensitised to gender inequalities from their bottom-up lived experience, particularly given concerns about women students' experiences of sexual harassment and sexual violence on campus. Whereas a lack of engagement by male students, by contrast, could reflect their top-down perspective from positions of power and privilege, and relatively less sexual harassment. I'm not saying men aren't sexual harassment or subject to sexual violence, I'm just saying that, generally speaking, more women are more likely to be affected by those things. It's also been suggested that learning to think like a lawyer is gendered, in that there's an encouragement to think objectively, logically, in a detached way, and to operate in a competitive manner, and that these are traditionally associated with masculinity. But it's also possible that learning to think like specific types of lawyers, particularly in relation to particular legal subjects, might be further gendered. So some subjects require more emotional labour, more empathy, more compassion, more connectivity, more dealing with the distress of others and distressing narratives and sad stories, in a nutshell. And those are also the subjects that are popular with women: family law, the law clinic, health and social welfare law, and so on. And this again resonates with early research, which suggests that women students are more likely to be drawn to social justice and social welfare issues, while male students are more likely to be drawn to legal subjects in which emotional control is the norm. So there is potentially some differentiation, some gender differentiation, based on the degree of emotionality a subject might evoke or require from a student to engage with it. So there are significant feminist critiques of law, which some of my socio-legal colleagues here will be aware of. So feminist social legal scholars critique the idea of this atomistic legal subject, autonomous legal subject, the competitive rational man of law. And instead, feminist social legal scholars talk about relationality, interpersonality, and emphasise that we are mutually dependent and interdependent across the life course. However, the subjects where the women are overrepresented in YLS suggest that they are more interested in caring in the law, than perhaps the male students are, which again reflects women's greater representation in caring professions more broadly. There are also questions about gender norms and stereotypes, gendered microaggressions, and the subtle reproduction of masculinities, whether actual or perceived, in some specialist subjects in legal education. It might put some students off. I've put question marks because that's me just kind of speculating, really. As you'll know, there's quite a lot of speculating about these connections. And I'm going to talk about how I'm going to try and deal with that speculation shortly. I'm coming to the end now. This is the end. Ethnicity couldn't be analysed. This is important. So I wanted to analyse ethnicity. I couldn't because it's special category data under the Data Protection Act. So I had to go through a laborious but understandable process to get a DPIA assessment, data protection, whatever assessment. The data protection team were very helpful. They held my hand as I went through it. There were some tears along the way because it is a traumatic process, I have to say. And then I submitted it to the ethics committee, who approved it. And again, the law school gave me funding for a research assistant to match the data with the other stats that we already have. And I currently have a research assistant doing that for us now. So hopefully that information is going to be, once I've analysed it, available kind of autumn time, and I'll be publishing around that as well. I think it'll be really interesting to see how ethnicity intersects with gender. It may add quite a significant nuance, I think, to what happens. But I won't tell you why, because that's completely off the top of my head. Now, the major limitation is that the data only shows, up until this year, module option allocation as opposed to preference. So all we can talk about is where they ended up being put. We can't 100% say that's where they wanted to be put. But we're now analysing each year preference and the relationship between preference and allocation. So I should be able to talk about that in a more informed way in the years to come, hypothetically. And of course it applies to a single law school and not a law school that's necessarily representative of other law schools. I am hoping to do a collaborative project with other law schools in the UK to see how the data compare more broadly. What are the implications? What are the pedagogical implications? I'm so proud of myself. I cannot tell you how hard I find it to say pedagogy. And I have been practicing at home and even in the lift when I come up here, and I've managed to say it every time without stumbling. I'll probably, if I have to say it one more time, of course I will stumble. Is that 5 minutes left? Or I'd run over? Okay, cool, thanks. You just have to ask me questions in 3 minutes rather than 2. So this is the last thing. What are we going to do about it? I talked to a colleague, male colleague, who's also interested in it, and he's going to do a project on corporate and commercial law and why in particular there's a gender pattern there. And I told him the story and I gave him the paper and he was very interested. And he immediately said, well, what are we going to do to get more women on the courses where they're underrepresented? And I said, well, what are we going to do about making more courses that are relevant to the topics women are interested in? And we laughed because, of course, we had particular standpoints. And the solution involves both of those things and more besides. So that's me talking about, right. Yes, module availability, I'm just going to talk very briefly about that. We had 2 module options that didn't run this year, both because the leaders were on research leave. One module option, intellectual property, a substitute module leader was found and that module still ran. That had an equitable representation of male and female students. The other module, social welfare law, didn't have a substitute lecturer, and so it didn't run, and that's the module that women students are more interested in. So we had indirect discrimination and indirect disadvantage through that different decision making about those 2 modules. And what I think we need to do is audit the modules that are available each year to make sure that we don't have a kind of gender discrepancy. We also need to think about, are we recruiting the right people to represent the kind of interests that women students have? What I'm not going to talk about now is the Fairness Project because I'm mindful of time and I have run over. And so just to say, I'm going to skim. There has been an interesting project with 3 law schools in the UK who have tried to do work with people who are potentially going to be marginalised in legal careers about what they can do to overcome that. And interestingly, what the students who have been working on these projects, who gave very positive feedback about it, didn't talk about was changing the system. They all talked about how they could adapt to the system to try and succeed more within it. That's something that I hope we're going to work on at YLS as well, to think about what we can do to support our students who may face additional barriers going into the legal profession. And I'm going to do more research, basically. I want to find out the causation. I've tried to ask students. I did a survey that had such a minimal response rate that it didn't do any good. Tried to run focus groups, but the strikes got in the way. So essentially that attempt didn't work this year, and I'm going to try and do some more about it. Need to look at intersectionality, need to understand what students think about all this stuff, and need to conduct more comparative research with other law schools. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you for your time. Do you want to go on next? And then we'll do a Q&A at the end with whatever time we've got left, out of fair play.
Sure. If anyone has a burning question.
Has anybody got a burning question? Talk about, have you really got a question to ask now? There. Oh, go on. Okay, let's just go with it.
I'm from the inclusive learning team, and a couple of us ran a focus group. It was only a very small focus group with some students about assessment. And one of the really interesting things that came up about assessment was that they chose the modules. Students were choosing modules based on who they thought would give them the best marks.
Ooh.
So I don't know whether you want to just maybe think about that. Might be a factor.
Yeah.
But it's just a thing.
No, and I think I need to have a brainstorm with people, because it's my own standpoint, so I'm looking at it from a very narrow gendered lens, and it's really important to hear all the possible factors that students may take into account.
Sue, are you going to speak to employers and alumni in relation to this as well? Because that might be quite interesting, I would suggest. If you haven't already thought of that, you probably have.
Yeah, so Chris is our employment tutor. Pardon? That's why I stumbled. I wasn't sure if it was employment or employability, and does a fantastic job supporting students in finding their way in their first steps in their legal careers. But yeah, absolutely, we do need to talk to employers as well. I mean, I hope that Chris and I will work on this together and develop our own kind of fairness project perhaps in time. We've talked about it a bit, haven't we? So that's what we're working towards. Okay, that's going to be the last one, because I really don't want to. I just was on another seminar where some woman was only there for 7 minutes at the end, and I don't want to repeat the injustice. Do you want to just... Oh. What's happening? Yeah. No pressure on being quick.
I was just wondering if you'd had any feedback or information about, because you mentioned that the majority of students do get their top choices, but some don't. I was wondering what the students who have been allocated modules that are different to what they were initially interested in, do they have any experiences? Did it broaden their horizons? Because there is value in getting out of your comfort zone. So I was wondering if perhaps having a module that isn't necessarily within your preconceived field of interest, whether that potentially benefited students in terms of what they felt they were capable of or interested in.
Yeah, that's certainly another thing to explore. I have to say that the students that get their fifth choice are pretty disgruntled. But it may be for their own good, even if they don't realise it. But it's certainly something to be finding out. Do you still need my laptop? Or have you put it somewhere else? I don't know where you've put it. Thank you for listening to me.
Hello, I'm Thomas. I'm a lecturer from the psychology department. And I'm going to talk to you about a similar kind of theme about inequalities, but more looking at social class-based inequalities. And this is a project that I ran with my PGCAT teaching qualification project that I did last year. So I'm going to look at the social class differences in the student journey from secondary school through to university. So it's kind of it's a broad range of looking at the student journey and student experiences. I'm mainly going to be touching on socioeconomic status as a measure of social class, student belonging and the student experience, and then also academic performance and how these things all relate to each other. So this is a nice little image of Victorian England, as you can see, with the hierarchical stratification of class, with the wealthy aristocracy at the top, and you have the middle class emerging after the Industrial Revolution, and then the engines of the Industrial Revolution, the working classes at the bottom. In the universities, we mainly have most students coming from the middle classes, and we have a smaller portion from both the upper and the working classes. So to measure, so obviously I've been talking about social class, but just to measure, I'm using socioeconomic status, which more specifically is a measure of one's social and economic standing in society, which encompasses you and your family. So it's not just about individual students, but their family and their upbringing. There's their education, their parents' education, their parents' work, parents' income, and their social status as a family, all of which shape an individual's development and influence their prospects in life. So a key example of how social class impacts people's prospects in life is the relationship between social class or socioeconomic status and education. So in 2020, the most recent stats I could see, only 23% of students from the poorest quintile, so poorest quintile is the bottom fifth of society, out of that bottom fifth, only less than a quarter of those students went on to university, and that was a record high. For those lower ECS students who do make it to university, they're less likely to attend a Russell Group university compared to higher ECS or wealthier students. And if they do end up coming to a Russell Group university, they're less likely to attain a good degree, so a 2-1 or a first, compared to high ECS students. So just for an example, the LPN, that stands for low participation neighbourhoods, I believe, so comparing the bottom to the top quintile social class-based students, basically wealthier students are 14% more likely to get a 2-1 or a first at York. Okay, so how does socioeconomic status and student belonging operate at Russell Group universities? So belonging, the student group at the start of today were talking about belonging and how important it was that they felt like they fit in, that they were accepted, that people liked them. So they were talking about student belonging quite a bit. We could think more specifically, belonging can be defined as feeling welcome and accepted by others, feeling like you fit in, having social connections, feeling like people care about you and respect you, so both staff and students. To sort of summarise my findings, what I found was that for lower ECS students, time spent working jobs and part-time jobs alongside the financial inability to socialise at one's leisure means exclusion from the typical Russell Group University experience of cafe lunches and restaurants and nights out with their students. And indeed, I have some students that I talk to that have a much more luxurious social life than I do. So it's quite interesting to interact with these students. So this culminates in feeling, so that poorer student, that working class student who knows that their friends are going out, who knows that they can't afford, they have to decline invitations. Oh no, I can't do that, I'm working, can't do that because I can't afford it. This culminates in feelings that they don't belong here, and it has downstream ramifications for academic performance. So that was a bit of a sharp summary, and now I'm actually going to talk about the study that I looked at, and I'm going to talk about the specific measures and the results and discuss the findings. So the design was a mixed method design. So online, using both quantitative and qualitative analyses. The participants were 265 York psychology students, mostly white, mostly female, and mostly first year. We kind of have the opposite problem of STEM subjects. We have too many women in psychology. We're trying to get some of them out, and it's quite interesting. And the design was such, answered consent, demographics, and then completed the quantitative measures, qualitative measures, and then we're thanked and debriefed. So social class and socioeconomic status, quite a big sort of concept. How do we actually measure that? So I used this ladder called the MacArthur scale. So there's a ladder from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst off, 10 being the best off, and you can just ask people whereabouts would they place themselves and their family on this ladder. It's quite a good, well-used scale. And so to accompany this, you ask participants, we're interested in where you feel your family stands in society relative to others. Think of the ladder below as representing where people stand in society. At the top of the ladder are the people who are the best off, those whose families have the most money, most education, best jobs. Where would you place your family on this ladder? So you may even just like to think, I'm not going to ask anyone, but you could even think about this yourself. Whereabouts do you fit in? Okay, so how do we measure feelings of belonging? Again, we talk about this, it comes up a lot. How do you actually measure it? So on a simple scale with 8 questions, here are 3 of them. How much respect do other students from the University of York show you? How connected do you feel to staff at the University of York? And how welcoming have you felt the University of York to be? And you get an average of that and use that. Final measure in the quantitative analysis is academic performance. So I just asked participants, what are your average grades this academic year for both exams and course assessments? It wasn't the exact grades. I didn't use exact grades. The honest reason for that is because the ethics would have been too complicated and I didn't want to do it. So I just asked them to guess. But what they did come up with was a distribution that resembled the actual true distribution of grades in the department. So it's reasonable enough for this. Not perfect, but reasonable enough. So here's a picture, a diagram of the results. I found that feelings of belonging mediated the relationship between socioeconomic status and academic performance. So just to break this down a little bit, so if you just look at the bottom two things, or actually if you look at the three things, socioeconomic status, belonging, academic performance, those are just those three variables that I just talked about before. If you look at the relationship between the bottom, so the socioeconomic status is not significantly related to academic performance, so that just means that knowing someone's social class doesn't give you a good indication of what their grades were. So that's actually kind of quite good, I think. But I did find that socioeconomic status, so knowing how wealthy someone is, did tell me how much they felt, or was a predictor of how much they felt like they belonged to university. And so what we found was that basically the wealthier students felt like they belonged more in the university, and then those students who felt like they belonged more had better academic performance. So we'd say this is an indirect relationship between socioeconomic status and academic performance via feelings of belonging. And the same goes opposite way because it's correlational, that poorer students feel like they belong less, and those students who feel like they belong less do worse academically. Which is what I just said there. But it's important to say that the effects were quite weak, and so caution should be taken when interpreting these significant findings that the effect sizes were relatively small. So don't want to overemphasize this relationship. But that's partly why I also used a qualitative analysis as well to provide some more breadth and depth to the topic and look at it from a different perspective, which I'm all about. So this is the question. We're interested to know more about your personal experiences of being a student at the University of York. How do you think your social class has impacted your student experience or academic performance? And then the students respond, and I look at it, and this is what I see. So there were four main themes that I'm going to talk about now. The first two are based on the higher social class students, and then the next two are based on the lower social class students. Now, if you remember, I said that most university students are middle class, and I'm not going to talk about them too much. I was more interested in the higher, the bottom and lower portions of the distribution. So the two themes there are high SES, and I'll talk about these in a bit more detail. High SES upbringing improves academic preparation for university, so that's that, high school experience leading up to university. And then also high SES, like being wealthier, provides benefits during university. And then for the lower SES students, that being lower SES, so being poorer, has financial and social costs while at university, and lower SES impairs student experience more than academic performance, at least in this study. So again, we use this ladder, so I know like each student who responded, I can see where they put themselves on this ladder, so I can use this to inform what class they're sort of from. So for this student here, these responses are from students who put themselves around an 8 out of 10, so probably consider these like upper class students or high SES students, depending on your perspective. So to the question, how do you think your social class has impacted your student experience or academic performance? The student said, greatly. I was able to attend a highly academic private school that allowed me to have one-on-one support to be able to obtain the high results required to get into university. And the students were quite forthcoming and quite open, and I did appreciate their sort of honesty in the responses. And this was just one example. Here's another example. Due to my family being quite high class, I got a very good private education, which I believe has given me more social and academic skills to utilise at university. And then just a third student here said, I think coming from an environment at school where I pushed very hard has been reflected by my good attendance and the amount I work at university, and thus my academic performance. So all of these things talking about how their economically privileged background has improved their preparation even before coming to university, that private tuition, going to the fancy schools, having all the support systems around them. This helps them before they even get into university. So we see these disparities before students even arrive. Okay, higher SES provides benefits during university. So this was just one. It's a little bit long. I apologise for doing the thing of putting a big block of text on the screen, but let me read it out for you. I think having family that has gone to university has really helped encourage and support me. The financial support my family can afford means I do not have to work alongside my studies, so I have more time to devote to university and downtime. As well as taking volunteering opportunities, I can have intellectual conversations about university, which help me feel heard and understood, supporting me in my studies. From my experience with my own university life and others, I think class makes a big impact on your time at university. Now, when I read that, I was like, this is the one to put in the slide. I couldn't really write it better myself. There's just so many different things going on there about their supportive family networks, obviously the economic wealth, being able to talk to their parents, feeling heard and understood, having that social support throughout the university has such a profound impact on students' ability to learn to turn up to class, to have support when they need it and that sort of thing. So very interesting. Now let's look down below the ladder at some students who place themselves. And again, this is where students place themselves. I'm not putting them there. This is where they put themselves. This person from around a 4, so probably lower SES, I think my social class means I have more money concerns, so I have to limit how many activities I take part in. I have to work part-time, so spend less time on my studies. Okay, so these students are aware that they're missing out, aware they have to make choices about what they can do and what they can afford not to do. Some students are also saying, I can't participate in many opportunities due to a lack of money. It's just kind of simple. Okay, what have I got here? Lower SES impairs student experience more than academic performance. This came out quite a bit, that students were saying that their social class wasn't necessarily impacting on their grades, and that was actually borne out by that quantitative analyses as well, that we found not a relationship between class and grades. But what the students were saying here was that it was their student experience that was being compromised. That yes, they were going to the library and studying, but they weren't going out and meeting their friends, they weren't socialising and doing activities. They had less time and money because they had to work part-time, so there's less time and money. And with the limited time that they've got, they are spending it studying and not socialising, and hence the sort of inequality in the student experience. One student said, having no role models and no one to look up to in terms of high achieving is hard, especially always worrying about money when peers around you aren't the same as they can just borrow from their parents. Another example. This just quite concisely, personally, being lower class does not have a strong impact on performance, academic performance, but on other aspects of university, such as living costs and routines. Okay, so let me just, I'm mindful of the time as well, let me also race through my discussion. Okay, it's all right? All right, thank you. On the one hand, the quantitative results, that was that diagram mediation analyses, are somewhat positive that SES wasn't related to academic performance, which means that there was a similar academic performance at different levels of class, which I think is a good thing. Oh, sorry, that was... however, the qualitative findings complement this study and reveal that the seeming equality in academic performance actually comes at the cost of the student experience and the mental health of the lower SES students, sometimes. These findings align well with recent thematic analyses on the same topic. Thematic analyses revealed clear higher SES privilege and heart-wrenching student experiences from the lower SES students about financial troubles, feeling like they're missing out and that they don't belong at university. And this was hard for me as well because these were actually students in my department at the time. And so I was reading about these stories of students that I am probably interacting with and teaching, because I teach at all levels of the undergraduate degree. So it's quite sad to see. Okay, discussion point. Award gap project, so there's different award gaps. There's a award gap for this differences in degree outcomes. You can look at social class, you can look at different races, you can look at gender. And I think overall it's very well intentioned that we were trying to reduce these gaps. But this study made me pause and reflect and think, okay, at what cost? If on paper it looks like the university is getting to reduce this social class gap, but actually it's those students, those lower class students who are really struggling and needing more support, having more mental health difficulties because they're trying to balance studying and working without any social support. Is that necessarily a good thing? If on paper it looks like we're doing well, we don't have so much of a gap, but if the students are struggling, I think it brings into question the ethics of encouraging widening participation. And I come from a poor background, so I come from the same sort of thing. But it does make me question the ethics and our moral responsibility of inviting these poorer students to come to this middle class institution if we know, and we do know, that they're going to probably have quite a difficult time. Okay, final point, and then I'll stop, is more of a comment more broadly about our approach to equality and diversity and inclusion at the university. So this was the most recent one I can find. It is dated 2017 to 2022, but I did get this just from a couple of days ago and I couldn't find a more recent strategy. So it's possible this has changed very recently, but at least this was a strategy that I could see on the website. It's a big document listing all these great, wonderful things about equality, diversity and inclusion. And I just want you to have a little read through that orange paragraph there, and probably no surprises to guess what's missing based on the topic of this talk. So our university community is made up of students and staff who are recruited locally, nationally, internationally. Many identities and experiences shape the diversity of our community, including gender, gender identity, ethnicity, culture, nationality, sexual orientation, physical, learning and mental health disabilities, having religious or other beliefs, age, and combining career or study with caring responsibilities. Now, I think that's all good to consider. I'm not for a minute trying to say we shouldn't do that. There's something missing, I think, from there. And you probably can guess what it is: social class or socioeconomic status. Why are we not prioritising and considering this as an equality and diversity issue? This is at the University of York. I think this is an oversight. If I can take liberty, I'm just going to end on this point here, is that I think we, as a university, but also as a society, we're really good at looking at some of these things, some of these differences that we should celebrate. Gender differences, sexuality differences, racial differences. I think that I'm not for a minute saying that we should not acknowledge and celebrate these differences where possible. I'm totally on board with that. What I think we're not good as a university, and again as a society, is how do we deal with those differences that people are ashamed of, that people feel guilty about, that they don't want to celebrate? How do we deal with equality and diversity issues which are about differences in experiences of violence, of trauma, of social class, things that don't look so good on a billboard? We really are very poor at that. And I guess if I could leave you with just one thing, it would be to consider that let's have a diverse approach to equality and diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really touching, honestly. I was just wondering if you think that part of the reason there's no relationship could be the bottleneck before you get into university. So I know that I come from like a lower quintile area, and so I got lowered expected grades to get into university, but they're still very high. And if you haven't had the support, I still think it creates that like bottleneck of like intellectual ability before you even get into university. So I was just wondering if you think that it impacted the lack of effect.
So just to clarify, you're saying like the lower numbers of working class students. Possibly, but the distribution was pretty good for just a sort of random distributions. Certainly having. I think almost in a word, no, not necessarily. But perhaps, do you want to rephrase the question? Maybe I'm not getting the question right.
I just mean that the lack of relationship between socioeconomic status and academic outcome might be that low socioeconomic status students haven't had as much support, and so may already be outperforming in terms of like natural ability when they come in because of those high entrants.
Oh, I think I see what you mean. So you mean that the sort of the rest of the working class students have already peeled off before?
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually really interesting. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't understand. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't word it that well first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go up here first, if that's all right.
Thanks, that was a very enlightening presentation. I was quite interested that it didn't directly impact academic performance, actually. My question's quite similar. So I too came from sort of a lower economic area. Really, I was quite interested that apart from your wonderful quote on slide 13, the nice long one, I was just wondering how much, I guess a lot more of lower economic students, first generation, neither of their parents went. And I just wondered if that kind of came up, because that obviously has quite an impact. Neither of my parents went, and I can't, or I would struggle to go home and have, the academic conversations or relate to what I've been doing here, because they just can't relate. They never had this experience.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question, and definitely it came up in the qualitative results quite a bit, that quite a few students said that the very same thing, that if their students, their parents didn't go to university, then they didn't have someone to talk to about choosing university. Their parents were, for no fault of their own, but they didn't have that sort of knowledge that someone whose parents did go to university. So I think that's a big thing that's associated with class, is that, well, what did you call it here? The first generation students. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have a question necessarily, but I'm from the Inclusive Learning team and I lead on the Award Gap Research project. So I'll be interested to link up with you perhaps and chat to you some more about some of the data that we've found on the research that we've been doing. We did focus groups, for example, with First and Family/LPN students last year that got some really interesting quotes. They do align quite a lot with some of the stuff that you found. What I found really interesting about your research was that you spoke to students from the higher up of the scale as well, which we haven't done that. So it was interesting to see things from their point of view.
Yeah.
But if you want some more data on LPM, we can have a chat about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you. I didn't expect like you say, the really weak indirect effect with academic achievement, but from a lot of the quotes that are popping up, I was interested if there was any information on like graduate outcomes, because a theme was coming up like, I have to do this part-time job, so I can't, network with other people, I can't volunteer. I was wondering if potentially there might be like a employment or underemployment gap when it comes to the social classes, because I know people personally who've been like, oh, I got this job in a lab because my parents know someone who could get me connected, and obviously not everyone has those connections that they can utilise. So I was interested if there's like any data out there regarding that aspect.
The short answer is I don't know off the top of my head. That's a great question, but I don't know. To come back to the first part of the question, have I still got access to this thing? Yeah, so the graph diagram, where is it? There. A couple of things about that non-significant relationship between ECS and academic performance. Part of it is certainly because of the measure. So if I used a more robust measure, like if I actually looked at the students' grades, that would give a better indication. So it's possible, because remember I just asked students to guess, well not guess, but to give their best estimate of their overall grades. That might not necessarily be completely accurate. So it's possible that is I know it's a design flaw, and that design flaw could have impacted the results. It's also possible that because we do have this like award gap in social class award gap at York, for sure, it's possible that because I only asked first and second year students, and it's possible that the difficulties may arise later on in the jumps to second and third year. So I didn't look at any third year students. So it's possible if I had done that, that there might be that difference, if you know what I mean. Basically, if students are sort of finding it difficult for that step up to second year and step up to third year where those grades actually count towards their degree. In other words, like these students might be blissfully unaware of like how difficult things are going to come and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much to both of our presenters. They were both really thought-provoking presentations, I thought. Time to enjoy lunch, I think. Thanks, everyone.